The boardroom fell dead quiet. All you could hear was my father's little laugh, that smug, knowing chuckle of his, bouncing off the dark mahogany walls like it owned the place. I'd been bracing myself for this moment for a long, long time. 3 years I'd been building my investment portfolio without breathing a word of it to anyone in my family. 3 years of sitting across from my parents at the dinner table, biting my tongue while they ran their tech manufacturing company straight into the ground. 3 years of hearing, "Sweetie, let the adults handle the business talk," every time I so much as opened my mouth about market trends or supply chain bottlenecks. But even with all that preparation, I hadn't pictured it going down quite like this. My parents, Richard and Patricia Chin, had built Chin Technologies out of nothing. Literally a garage startup, 25 years ago, back when that still meant something. They made specialized circuit boards for aerospace companies, and for a solid 2 decades, nobody could touch them in that space. They were kings of their little corner of the world. Then the last 5 years happened. Cheaper competition flooded in from overseas. They stopped innovating, and, I'm going to be honest here, they made some truly terrible financial decisions, the kind that keep accountants awake at night. Money was pouring out of that company like water through a cracked dam, and they just kept patching holes with duct tape and denial. Me? I was their only kid. Their daughter Emma, who'd gone off and gotten a degree in, and this is a direct quote from my mother, something useless, computational finance and applied mathematics, from MIT. Apparently that didn't count for much at the Chin family dinner table. After I graduated, I took a job at a boutique investment firm in Boston. Mom liked to call it my little job. She'd say it with this tight smile, the way you'd compliment a kid's finger painting. "Oh, that's nice, honey. Here's the thing they didn't know," and I mean they had absolutely no idea. I wasn't just some junior analyst pushing spreadsheets around. I was a partner, a managing partner, and over the course of 3 years, I'd taken my signing bonus and a handful of early stock options and turned them into something that would have made their jaws hit the floor. We're not talking comfortable. We're talking substantial, the kind of substantial that changes the power dynamic in any room you walk into. The emergency board meeting had been called because Chin Technologies was dying. Not struggling, not going through a rough patch. Dying. They'd maxed out every credit line they had. 2 of their biggest clients had walked away after 1 too many late deliveries, and the ugly truth nobody wanted to say out loud was that they were staring down a bankruptcy filing within 60 days. The board had already been grinding through the agenda for 2 hours by the time I showed up. I was late on purpose. I slipped in through the back door and took a seat in the last row, quiet as a ghost. Mom spotted me right away. She had radar for that kind of thing. "Emma, what are you doing here? This is a board meeting." "I was invited," I said, kept my voice steady. No emotion, just facts. Dad actually laughed out loud, not a warm laugh, the other kind. "Invited? Honey, this is serious business. We're discussing the future of the company." "I understand that." I paused just long enough to let it land. "Do you?" Mom's voice went sharp as a razor. "We're talking about complex financial restructuring here, Emma. Debt-to-equity swaps, convertible notes, this isn't something you can just Google." I didn't answer, just opened my laptop and started pulling up files. Around the table, the board members were shifting in their seats, looking everywhere except at my parents. Most of them already knew why I was there. Thomas Harrison, the board chairman, one of the original angel investors who'd believed in my parents back when they were still soldering prototypes in the garage. He'd personally insisted I be at this meeting. But Mom and Dad, they were completely in the dark. Marcus Webb, their CFO, tried to smooth things over. Good old Marcus, always the diplomat. "Richard, Patricia, maybe we should get back to the agenda. We really need to go over these refinancing proposals." "In a minute," Dad said, waving him off. He was still locked in on me. "Emma, sweetheart, I appreciate you trying to be supportive, I really do, but this isn't the place. We're having confidential discussions about the company's financial situation." "I know exactly what the financial situation is," I said, and I let each word carry its own weight. "Revenue down 42% over 3 years, operating losses of $18 million last quarter alone. At your current burn rate, you've got maybe 8 weeks before the lights go out." The room went cold. Stone cold. You could have heard a paperclip drop on carpet. Mom's cheeks flushed red. Where did you get those numbers? The preliminary financial reports. I reviewed them last week. Those reports are confidential, Dad snapped. His voice had that edge now, the one that used to scare me when I was 12. Who leaked them to you? Thomas Harrison cleared his throat. He had a way of doing that. Quiet, measured, that somehow commanded more authority than anyone else raising their voice. Richard, Patricia, I think we need to… No. Mom cut him off cold. This is completely out of line. Emma, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing here, but you need to leave. Right now. I didn't move. Didn't flinch. I'm a voting member of this board. I have every right to be sitting in this chair. Dad laughed again. That same laugh. The one I'd been hearing my whole life, at birthday dinners, at holiday gatherings, every single time I dared to have an opinion about anything that involved money or strategy or the real world as they defined it. A voting member? He was almost grinning, like I'd told a joke he found genuinely funny. Emma, you don't own a single share of Chin Technologies. You're not on the board. I don't know who gave you the idea that you could just waltz into a board meeting and… She owns 47% of the company. Thomas said it so quietly, you almost could have missed it. But nobody missed it. Those words landed in that room like a grenade with the pin already pulled, just sitting there on the table, waiting. Mom turned to face Thomas so slowly it was almost cinematic. What did you just say? Emma owns 47% of Chin Technologies. Thomas repeated, steady as a heartbeat. She's been accumulating shares for the past 14 months. As of 6 months ago, she became the single largest shareholder in this company. I sat there and watched my father's face. It was like watching weather change and fast forward. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something darker, anger, raw, unfiltered anger. That's impossible, he said. Those shares are closely held. Any transfer would need our approval. The shares she acquired came from the employee stock option pool and from 3 board members who chose to sell their positions, Thomas explained patiently. Every transaction was legitimate, arm's length, properly documented and filed with the SEC. Everything was done by the book. This is absurd, Mom said. But you could hear the crack in her voice, the certainty draining away like sand through fingers. Emma doesn't have that kind of money. Do you have any idea what 47% of this company is worth? Based on your last valuation? Roughly $440 million, I said, keeping my voice low and even. Although, if I'm being honest, that valuation was generous. Given how the company's actually performing right now, the real number is closer to $320 million, which means I overpaid by about $120 million. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound was Marcus frantically clicking away on his laptop, eyes wide, scrolling through SEC filings like a man watching his assumptions burn down in real time. My God, he whispered. She's right. It's all here. Every filing. How did I miss this? Because I structured the purchases through 3 separate LLCs, I said. All properly disclosed. I didn't hide anything. But you'd have to dig a little to connect all the dots back to me. Dad shoved his chair back from the table, the legs screeched against the hardwood floor, and stood up, towering over the room. This is some kind of game. Emma, what the hell are you playing at? It's not a game, Dad. I'm an investor. And right now, I'm a very concerned one, because this company is in serious trouble. He turned to the other board members, spreading his arms like a preacher appealing to his congregation. She can't even read a balance sheet. His voice was climbing now, losing that polished, boardroom-appropriate tone he usually wore like a suit of armor. She's 28 years old. She works as some kind of junior analyst at… She's a managing partner at Quantum Capital. Thomas interrupted, firm but not unkind. She's been running their technology portfolio for 2 years. Her fund returned 43% last year. Mom looked like she'd seen a ghost. All the color just drained right out of her face. That's not possible. We would have known. You would have told us. Why? I asked. Just that one word. Simple. Honest. So you could wave it away like you've waved away everything else I've ever done? So you could tell me I don't understand the real world? Explain to me one more time that my little job isn't actual business? Don't you dare take that tone with us, Mom snapped. But there was something underneath the sharpness, something that sounded almost like fear. Then don't dismiss me in a boardroom, I said. I kept my voice level, but I meant every syllable down to my bones. I'm here as an investor, a majority investor actually. I closed on an additional 8% this morning. I glanced over at Daniel Rothstein, one of the board members, who suddenly looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. That puts me at 55%, majority shareholder. And then the room just exploded. 3 board members started talking over each other. Marcus was typing like his keyboard owed him money. Mom and Dad just stood there, frozen, staring at me like I'd shapeshifted into someone they'd never met before. Thomas picked up his gavel and brought it down hard. Order. Everybody please, let's handle this like rational adults. There's nothing rational about any of this, Dad said. His voice had dropped lower now, quieter, but there was something harder in it, something cold. If what you're saying is true, and I'm not saying I buy any of it, but if it's true, then what? What exactly is your grand plan here, Emma? You're going to ride in on a white horse and rescue the company with your 5 whole years of work experience. I'm going to vote to approve the restructuring plan that Thomas put on the table, I said calmly, the one you were about to shoot down. Mom whipped around to face Thomas. What restructuring plan? Thomas slid a thick document across the polished table. Quantum Capital, through one of its investment funds, is offering $200 million. That money would give Chin Technologies the capital to overhaul the manufacturing lines, rebuild the R&D department you've been gutting, and bring in the senior leadership this company desperately needs. In exchange, Quantum takes a convertible note that could increase their equity stake to 65% if the company fails to hit certain performance targets. Absolutely not, Dad fired back without even a breath of hesitation. We are not going to dilute ourselves into minority shareholders of our own company. You already are minority shareholders, I said. I own 55%, as of this morning. Mom's voice was trembling now, not with sadness, but with a fury so deep it seemed to come from somewhere primal. This is corporate raiding, she said. That's what this is. You're trying to steal the company your father and I poured our lives into. I'm trying to save it, I said. And I meant it. God, I meant it more than I'd ever meant anything. If you file for bankruptcy, you lose everything. The company gets carved up and sold for scrap. The brand disappears, and 240 people, real people, with families and mortgages and kids in school, they all lose their jobs, every single one of them. What I'm offering keeps the company alive. It keeps it growing, and everybody, every last person in this building, keeps their paycheck. Under your control, Dad said. The bitterness in his voice could have stripped paint off the walls. Under professional management, I corrected. I'm voting to keep Thomas as chairman. I'm voting to bring in Catherine Walsh from Innovate as CEO. And I'm voting to establish a new executive committee, one that actually holds leadership accountable to the board instead of letting them run unchecked. Mom's voice dropped to almost a whisper. And what about us? I looked her straight in the eye. No flinching, no looking away. You stay on the board, you keep your salaries, adjusted to market rate, and you get to watch the company you built keep breathing instead of being torn apart in bankruptcy court. Dad was on his feet again, pacing back and forth behind his chair, running both hands through his hair like a man trying to physically hold his thoughts together. This is insane. You're 28 years old. You've been in the workforce for, 5 years? And we're supposed to believe you've got $440 million to throw at a struggling circuit board company? $620 million, I said quietly. That's what I had under personal management as of last quarter, and that's separate from the $4.2 billion in assets I manage through Quantum's funds. The Chin Technologies investment is about 70% of my personal portfolio, so yes, it's a big bet. I won't pretend otherwise, but I've built the models. I've stress-tested every scenario. With the right management and the right capital behind it, this company can be worth $2 billion within 5 years. Marcus had stopped typing. He was just sitting there, nodding slowly, almost to himself. Her projections are actually conservative, he said, like a man who just had a religious experience staring at a spreadsheet. If we can lock down the SpaceX contract she references in her analysis— What SpaceX contract? Mom interrupted. And there it was, the card I'd been holding closest to my chest. The one I've been negotiating for the past 4 months, I said. SpaceX needs a specialized circuit board manufacturer for their next generation of Starlink satellites. Chin Technologies has exactly the capabilities they're looking for: the precision, the quality standards, the aerospace certifications. But you don't have the production capacity to handle the volume they need. With Quantum's $200 million investment, you could expand the manufacturing floor enough to take it on. It's a $340 million contract over 3 years, with options to renew. The silence that followed was so thick you could have choked on it. Dad had stopped mid-pace, one hand still tangled in his hair. Mom's knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the conference table. Then Mom spoke again, and her voice had changed. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something that sounded almost like heartbreak. Why? She asked. If you have all this money, all this success that we apparently knew nothing about, why pour it into us? You could have sat back and watched us fail. You could have waited for the bankruptcy, bought the assets for next to nothing, and built whatever you wanted on top of the ruins. Why do it this way? I took a breath. Because it's still yours, I said softly. Despite everything, every dismissal, every time you made me feel small, this is still the company you built with your own hands. Because 240 people show up to this building every morning, trusting that someone gives a damn about their livelihoods. Because the technology you created is genuinely brilliant, the brand still means something, and the market opportunity is real. I paused. And because I wanted to prove I could do it. Prove what? Dad asked. That I understand business. 3 words. That's all it took. 3 simple words, and the entire room felt like the air had been sucked out of it. I watched my father's face go red, not with anger this time, but with something closer to shame. I watched my mother turn her head away so she wouldn't have to look at me. Thomas cleared his throat, that gentle, authoritative sound of his. I think it would be wise to take a 15-minute recess, give everybody a chance to absorb what's happened here. Then we'll come back and put the restructuring proposal to a vote. One by one, the board members pushed back their chairs and filed out. Most of them couldn't even look at my parents on the way out. Marcus left his laptop open on the table, the SEC filings still glowing on the screen like evidence at a trial. Thomas lingered at the door and caught my eye. Emma, could I have a word? Outside? I nodded and followed him into the hallway, leaving my parents alone in that big, quiet room. Once we were far enough away that our voices wouldn't carry, Thomas turned to me. That was brutal, he said softly. It was necessary. You could have told them in private, before the meeting, given them a chance to process it without an audience. I almost laughed. I tried. 3 months ago, I picked up the phone and called my father. Told him I wanted to sit down and have a real conversation about the company's finances. You know what he said? He told me to focus on my little career and let him handle the business. I shook my head. They were never going to listen to me, Thomas. Not unless their backs were against the wall and they had absolutely no other choice. Thomas was quiet for a moment, weighing that. Then he nodded. The restructuring plan is rock solid. Catherine Walsh is a phenomenal pick for CEO. He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something gentler, almost fatherly. But you know this is going to blow up your relationship with your parents. You understand that, right? What relationship? The words came out before I could soften them. The one where they wave away every single thing I say? Where every accomplishment gets shrunk down because it doesn't fit their idea of what success looks like? Where I'm a grown woman with an MIT degree and $500 million in assets under management, and I'm still treated like a teenager who doesn't know how the world works? They're proud of what they built, Thomas said gently. This company, it's been their whole identity for 25 years. I know that, I said, and my voice cracked just a little. Just enough that I had to look away for a second. And I'm trying to make sure their life's work doesn't end up on an auctioneer's block. But they need to understand, really understand, that the way they've been doing things isn't working anymore. The market moved, the technology evolved, they needed to evolve with it, and they flat out refused. So yes, I'm forcing the issue. And now you're forcing their hand. Yes. Thomas studied my face for a long, searching moment. You know, when you first came to me about buying my shares, my gut reaction was to say no. I thought, here's this kid, barely out of her 20s, thinks she can play with the big dogs. But then I did my homework. I looked at your track record, the companies you'd backed, the returns you'd generated, and I realized something. He paused. You've got an instinct for this game that most people don't develop in an entire career. My parents taught me more than they realize, I said. Every dinner table conversation about production yields and supply chain headaches, every argument about vendor contracts I overheard through the walls, they taught me how to see inefficiencies, how to read a market, how to weigh risk against reward. I just took those lessons and pointed them at finance instead of circuit boards. Ironic, Thomas said with a faint, sad smile. Extremely. We stood there for a beat, both of us looking through the glass walls of the boardroom at my parents inside. They sat at opposite ends of that long conference table, as far apart from each other as the room would allow, neither one speaking. Dad was staring at the table. Mom was staring at the wall. Two people who'd built an empire together, sitting in silence while their world rearranged itself around them. They're going to fight you on this, Thomas warned. They'll go looking for any legal foothold they can find, any angle to block the restructuring. I know. That's exactly why I spent 14 months making sure every single filing was airtight, every transaction at arm's length, every disclosure submitted on time, in full, to the letter of the law. They can retain every blue-chip attorney on the Eastern Seaboard, Thomas. They won't find a single thread to pull. You've been planning this for a long time. 14 months, I confirmed. Since the first time I got a look at the quarterly numbers and realized just how far off the cliff they'd gone. Thomas shook his head slowly, almost in wonder. Your parents are brilliant, genuinely brilliant. They built technology that changed an industry, but running a business, managing people, managing growth, managing money. He trailed off. That was never their gift, and they'd rather burn the whole thing down than admit they need somebody else at the wheel. Which is exactly why the restructuring plan puts real operators in charge, I said. People who've actually scaled manufacturing companies before, people who understand supply chains and growth curves and all the unglamorous stuff that keeps a business alive. My parents can go back to doing what they've always been best at: engineering, product development, dreaming up the next breakthrough. They just can't be the ones running day-to-day operations anymore. You think they'll ever make peace with that? They don't have a choice. I hold 55%. I can outvote them on anything. That's not what I'm asking, Emma. I let out a long breath. No, probably not. Not at first, anyway. Maybe down the road, when the company's back on its feet and the revenue is climbing and the new contracts are rolling in. Maybe then they'll look at what happened today and see it for what it really was. I paused. And if they don't? If they never forgive me? Then at least 240 people still have jobs. At least a good company doesn't die because two stubborn people couldn't get out of their own way. The 15-minute break stretched to 20, then 25. Finally, Thomas suggested it was time to get back in there. The board members trickled back to their seats around the table, the air in the room thick with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. My parents were the last ones through the door. They walked in together, shoulder to shoulder, and took their seats at the far end of the table, a united front. Whatever differences they might have had with each other, in this moment, they were a team. Richard and Patricia Chin against the world, against their own daughter. Thomas brought the room to order. We have a proposal before us, a $200 million investment from Quantum Capital in exchange for convertible notes and a full board restructuring. Before we vote, I'd like to open the floor for any final discussion. Dad stood up. He'd used the break to pull himself together. You could see it in the way he squared his shoulders, the way he buttoned his jacket like he was preparing for battle. When he spoke, his voice had that careful, rehearsed quality it always took on when he believed he was delivering a speech for the history books. What Emma has done here today may be legal, I'll grant that much, but it is not ethical. He looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member one by one. She used her position. She exploited her knowledge of our vulnerabilities. She orchestrated a hostile takeover, and I'm going to call it exactly what it is, of the company that her mother and I spent 25 years of our lives building from nothing. Dad, I started. He held up his hand. I'm not finished. I closed my mouth. You sat in our house, he said, turning to face me directly now. You ate at our table. You laughed with us at Thanksgiving, and the whole time, you were quietly buying up shares in our company behind our backs. You waited until we were at our most vulnerable, and then you walked into this room and seized control. And now you want us to just accept it. Accept that we're minority partners in the company we created. Step aside and hand the keys to some stranger. Catherine Walsh isn't a stranger, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. She's one of the most accomplished operators in the industry. She grew Innovate from $50 million in revenue to $800 million in 7 years. She's not us, Mom said, and there was something so raw in the way she said it. Not angry anymore, just wounded. She doesn't know our culture. She doesn't understand our values. She has no idea what it took to build what we built. Marcus, quiet, careful, diplomatic Marcus, spoke up from his end of the table. With all due respect, Patricia, our culture and our values aren't going to mean a whole lot if we're filing for Chapter 7 in 60 days. Mom turned on him like he'd slapped her. Whose side are you on, Marcus? I'm on the side of the 240 people in this building who need their paychecks to clear every 2 weeks, Marcus said. His voice was steady, but there was real emotion underneath it, the kind that comes from someone who actually knows the names of the people on the factory floor. I'm on the side of the pension fund that's supposed to take care of them when they retire. I'm on the side of keeping this company breathing, and Emma's plan is the only viable path I see on this table. That's not true, Dad argued, grasping now. We have other options. There are other offers. You have one other offer, Thomas cut in. Davidson Industrial. They're willing to pay $120 million for the assets, in bankruptcy. They'd keep maybe 30 employees to manage the transition. Then they'd shut down this facility and move everything to their plant in Malaysia. Everyone else? Gone. Every machinist, every engineer, every person in the break room right now drinking coffee and wondering if they're going to have a job next month? Gone. There have to be other options, Mom insisted. But her voice had thinned out, like a wire stretched too tight. There aren't, I said quietly. Believe me, I've looked. 4 months I spent turning over every rock. I talked to every strategic buyer who might have an interest, every private equity firm, every investment bank. The market for specialized circuit board manufacturers right now is absolutely brutal. You're going up against companies with cheaper labor, newer technology, and war chests that make yours look like a piggy bank. The only reason Quantum Capital is willing to write this check is because I'm putting my own money on the line. My personal wealth, not just fund money, and because I've already locked down the SpaceX deal contingent on this restructuring going through. Dad's shoulders dropped an inch, just an inch. But I saw it. You should have come to us, he said. And for the first time all day, his voice cracked. Not a lot, just a fracture, just a hairline split in the armor. But it was there. You should have told us what you were planning, Emma. I tried, I said. 3 months ago, I called you and told you I thought the company was in real trouble. You told me I didn't understand business. That was different. How? I asked. How was it any different? I tried to help. I tried to share what I was seeing. The declining margins, the customer attrition, the cash flow problems, and you shut me down. The same way you've shut me down my entire life whenever I tried to talk about business, or strategy, or anything that mattered. That's not fair, Mom said, but even she didn't sound like she fully believed it. Isn't it? I looked at her. Really looked at her. How many times did you tell me my degree was impractical, Mom? How many times did you call my job cute? How many family dinners did you tell me to leave the business talk to people who actually understand it? The silence that followed wasn't just silence. It was 28 years of unspoken hurt, hanging in the air between us like smoke that wouldn't clear. I didn't want it to be like this, I said finally, and I was surprised by how tired my own voice sounded. I wanted to help. That's all I ever wanted. I wanted to take everything I'd learned and everything I'd built and use it to save the thing you created. But you couldn't see me. You couldn't see past the little girl who didn't understand how the real world works. You're 28 years old, Dad said. But the conviction was gone. The words just hung there, empty, a reflex more than an argument. I'm 28 years old with $620 million under management and a track record of successful investments across 17 different companies, I replied. I'm the 28-year-old who spotted the SpaceX opportunity that you missed completely. I'm the 28-year-old who put together a restructuring plan that keeps 240 families from losing their income. I leaned forward. So, I'm asking you honestly, Dad. At what point do I stop being too young and start being someone you actually listen to? Nobody had an answer. The room just sat there in it. Thomas broke the silence the way only he could, with a quiet authority that made everybody sit up a little straighter. I think it's time we vote. All in favor of accepting the quantum capital restructuring proposal, please raise your hand. My hand went up first. No hesitation. Thomas raised his. Then Marcus. Then 3 more board members, one after another, like dominoes falling in slow motion. 6 out of 11. All opposed. Mom and Dad raised their hands together. Synchronized, the way 2 people move when they've been a team for a quarter century. 2 other board members joined them. Old friends, old loyalists. People who'd been in the trenches with my parents since the early days. 4 votes against. The motion carries, Thomas announced. His voice was measured, almost gentle, like a doctor delivering news he wished he didn't have to give. The restructuring is approved. Dad shot to his feet so fast his chair nearly toppled over. We'll fight this. We'll find an attorney who can prove she manipulated the process, used insider information, something. Marcus didn't even look up from his screen. Every single trade was logged and disclosed, Richard. I've gone through each transaction personally. They're spotless. You could hire every white shoe law firm from here to Manhattan. It won't change a thing. Mom was staring at me from across the table, and the expression on her face, I've replayed it in my mind 1,000 times since that day, and I still can't fully name what I saw there. Hurt, yes. Anger, absolutely. But there was something else woven through it, something that looked almost like grief, like she was mourning someone who was still sitting right in front of her. There's one final item on today's agenda, Thomas said, pulling the room's attention back before the moment could spiral any further. Emma has asked to address the full company staff tomorrow morning. She'd like to explain the restructuring to the employees directly and take their questions. Given her position as majority shareholder, I think that's more than appropriate. Absolutely not, Dad said, fast and hard, like slamming a door. Those are our employees. They're the company's employees? I said gently. Not to wound him, just to tell the truth. And they deserve to hear what's happening from someone who can look them in the eye and give them real answers about their jobs and their futures. This is wrong. Mom stood up slowly, gathering her notebook, her pen, her reading glasses, collecting the small, familiar objects of her life like someone packing up after a funeral. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. What you've done here today, Emma, this isn't just about business. You've torn this family apart, over money, over control. I held her gaze. I didn't look away, even though every instinct in me wanted to. I saved your company, I said, whether you can see that right now or not. My parents walked out without another word, side by side, shoulders touching, the way they always walked. But something was different now. Something fundamental had shifted, and we all felt it. The door closed behind them with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than anything else that had happened in that room all day. The remaining board members filtered out in ones and twos. A few stopped to shake my hand or lean in close and murmur, "Congratulations," or "Well done." Quick, furtive words, like they were afraid of being overheard. Others wouldn't meet my eyes at all. They just gathered their things and slipped away, eager to put distance between themselves and whatever it was they'd just witnessed. Finally, it was just the three of us. Thomas, Marcus, me. 3 people sitting in a boardroom that still hummed with the aftershock of what had happened. Marcus leaned back in his chair and let out a breath he'd probably been holding for an hour. "Well," he said, "I've been doing this for 35 years. Boardroom brawls, hostile negotiations, corporate meltdowns. I've seen it all. And that was, without question, the most dramatic board meeting I have ever attended. It had to happen," Thomas said, rubbing his eyes. He suddenly looked every one of his 72 years. Richard and Patricia would have driven this company straight into a wall before they'd ever admit they needed someone else behind the wheel. "You know that, Marcus." "I do," Marcus admitted. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and asked the question that had nothing to do with balance sheets or SEC filings. "Will they recover from this? Not as executives, as people, as your parents?" I sat with that question for a long moment. Let it settle into the quiet of the room. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe. Someday. When the dust clears and they can look at the numbers and see that the company is healthy again, maybe then they'll understand why I did what I did." I paused. "Or maybe they'll spend the rest of their lives resenting me for being right, for proving that their daughter, the one who supposedly couldn't tell a balance sheet from a napkin, understood their business better than they did." "For what it's worth," Thomas said, and there was a warmth in his voice that caught me off guard. "You did the right thing today, Emma. Not the easy thing. Lord knows it wasn't the easy thing. But the right thing." I nodded, closed my laptop, stacked my papers, started gathering my things because if I sat in that room much longer, I was going to feel everything I'd been holding back, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I need to go prepare for tomorrow. The employees are going to have a lot of questions, and they deserve real answers. I was almost at the door when Marcus called out, "Emma." I turned. "Yeah?" "The SpaceX contract. Is it real? I mean, really real. Not a handshake and a hope. Actually, solid." I allowed myself a small smile. The first one all day. Verbal commitment from their VP of supply chain. Legal teams on both sides are finalizing the contract language as we speak. We should have ink on paper within 3 weeks. Marcus stared at me for a beat, then shook his head slowly. Not in disbelief, but in something closer to awe. "You understand what that means, right? If you actually pull this off, if that contract goes through, this company doesn't just limp along. It doesn't just survive, it transforms. You'd be turning a failing manufacturer into a critical supplier for the most ambitious space company on the planet." "That's the plan," I said from the doorway. "My parents always taught me to think big." I let that hang in the air for just a second. They just never imagined I'd think bigger than they did. I walked out of the building as the last light of the day was bleeding out across the parking lot, that golden hour glow that makes everything look softer than it really is. My phone was buzzing nonstop. My team at Quantum wanted a debrief. Catherine Walsh had already sent 3 messages about transition planning and onboarding timelines. My attorney needed confirmation that the restructuring documents had been properly filed with the state. But there was nothing from my parents, not a text, not a missed call, nothing. I sat in my car with the engine off, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the Chin Technologies building through the windshield. The logo my parents had designed themselves, back when they were young and broke and crazy enough to believe they could build something out of nothing, was lit up against the darkening sky. 25 years of their blood and sweat and stubborn, relentless ambition were inside those walls. 25 years of innovation and sacrifice and late nights and early mornings and the kind of bone-deep determination that most people only read about. And also 25 years of refusing to change, of clinging to the way things were because admitting they needed to evolve felt too much like admitting they'd been wrong. And now it was mine to fix. My phone buzzed one more time. "Thomas. Employee meeting tomorrow, conference room B, expect around 200. Most of them are scared out of their minds. Be ready for hard questions." I typed back, "I'm ready," and I was. 14 months of preparation had led to this. 4 months of back-and-forth negotiations with SpaceX, Countless late nights poring over production data, efficiency metrics, cost breakdowns, vendor contracts, learning every single corner of this business until I knew it in my sleep. I understood Chin Technologies now in ways my parents probably hadn't in years. Every production line, every bottleneck, every place where money was being wasted, and every place where it could be invested to actually grow. But what I wasn't ready for, what no amount of financial modeling or strategic planning could have prepared me for, was the hollow ache sitting in the center of my chest. The image of my mother's face as she'd walked out of that boardroom. Not angry anymore. Just broken. The sound of my father's voice catching in his throat when he'd said, "You should have come to us." But I did come to you, I thought, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I came to you 3 months ago, and 6 months before that, and a year before that. Every single time, I showed up with something real, real concerns, real analysis, real solutions, and every single time you patted me on the head and sent me back to the kids' table, every attempt met with that same tired, suffocating refrain. "You don't understand business, Emma. Leave it to the people who do." Well, now they knew I understood business. The question, the one that kept turning over and over in my mind as I sat alone in that darkening parking lot, was whether they would ever understand why I'd done it, whether they could ever separate the daughter from the decision, whether they could look at the saved jobs and the new contracts and the rising revenue and see love underneath it all, fierce, frustrated, stubborn love, instead of betrayal. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed to life. I pulled out of the parking lot slowly, watching the Chin Technologies building shrink in my rearview mirror. The building that held my parents' entire identity. The company that was now majority owned by their daughter, the one who supposedly couldn't read a balance sheet, who worked a cute little job, who needed to sit quietly and let the grown-ups handle the important things. Tomorrow morning, I would stand in front of 200 frightened people and tell them their jobs were safe. I'd walk them through the restructuring plan, step by step honestly, holding nothing back. I'd announce the SpaceX contract and watch the hope come back into their faces. I'd introduce Catherine Walsh and explain why she was the right person to lead them into what came next. And I'd answer every single question, no matter how hard, because those people deserved the truth from someone who actually had answers. And somewhere in the back of that room, I was sure of it, my parents would be standing, watching, listening to their daughter, the one who didn't understand business, the one who worked her little job, the one who needed to let the adults handle the important conversations, explain in clear and certain terms exactly how she had saved everything they'd ever built. Whether they'd ever thank me for it, or whether they'd carry the resentment like a stone in their chest for the rest of their lives, I honestly didn't know. That question didn't have a model I could build or a projection I could run. Some things you just have to live through and find out. But the company would survive. I knew that much. The jobs would be protected. The technology would evolve. The brand would grow into something even bigger than what my parents had originally imagined. And that had to be enough. Even if it meant the 2 people I loved most in this world might never speak to me again. I merged onto the highway, the city lights blurring past my windows, and drove toward tomorrow.